The night it happened, the air inside my house felt heavy, like even the walls were holding their breath. The clock on the mantel ticked too loud, each second slicing through the silence between us. My daughter sat across from me, legs crossed neatly, a notebook in her lap as if this were a business meeting. Her husband stood beside her, pretending confidence, but his fingers kept drumming the arm of the chair. I remember thinking how strange it was, that after everything I'd done for them, I still had to earn their softness. Then she said it. "Mom," she began, her voice steady rehearsed. "We need you to help us again. It's serious this time. David's in some trouble." I waited. There was always trouble. But this time, her eyes didn't dart away. She held my gaze, unwavering, and said, "He owes $700,000. The investment collapsed. We could lose everything if you don't step in." There it was, the sentence that would change everything. 700,000. For a moment, the world went silent. Even the clock seemed to stop. I saw her lips still moving, something about interest rates, missed deadlines, lawyers. But I couldn't hear any of it. My mind drifted all the times I'd bailed her out before. College loans, the wedding, the down payment on their house, even the IVF treatments when David said he'd handle it later. I thought of the nights I'd gone without sleep, calculating how to stretch my pension, my savings, my pride. And then I thought, no more, but I didn't say that out loud. I just looked at her, my little girl who used to braid my hair while I read bedtime stories, my daughter who once whispered, "I'll take care of you when I grow up." Now she was sitting across from me, demanding I take care of her again. David leaned forward, breaking the silence. "It's temporary, just until things stabilize. You know us. We always pay you back." I smiled faintly, the same smile I'd worn too many times before. "Of course," I said softly. Inside, I felt something shift, quietly, decisively, like a door closing forever. She reached for my hand. "You'll do it, right, Mom? You'll help us?" I met her eyes. I saw no malice there, just entitlement, born from years of me saying yes. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll take care of it." Her relief was immediate. She leaned back, smiling at David as if the world had been set right again. They started planning out loud, what to sell, what to refinance, where to move money. I listened to none of it, because in that moment, I already knew I wasn't going to save them this time. I was going to save myself. That night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The moonlight cut across the tiles like silver veins. My hands trembled as I traced the rim of my teacup. I should have felt anger, betrayal, but what I felt instead was calm. For the first time in years, I saw the truth clearly. I had built their safety net for my bones. And if I didn't step away now, I'd die holding it up. I went to the spare room and pulled out my old suitcase. It still smelled faintly of mothballs and airport dust. I placed it on the bed and unzipped it, the sound sharp and final. I packed deliberately. 2 dresses, a few photographs, my passport, the blue notebook where I'd recorded every payment I'd ever made for them. Each page a record of my love mistaken for obligation. At 3:47 a.m., I wrote a note. "I'll take care of it." Just that. No explanation. No goodbye. By dawn, the suitcase was in my car. The sun was still hiding below the horizon, the sky bleeding pale pink. I stood by the doorway for a long time, my keys in hand, listening to the silence. There was no one to stop me, no one to call my name. As I pulled away, I looked once in the rearview mirror. The house stood still, curtains drawn, a monument to everything I'd sacrificed. And for the first time in my life, leaving didn't feel like loss. It felt like the start of something I'd forgotten existed. Freedom. At the airport gate, my phone buzzed, 7 missed calls from my daughter. Then a new message appeared. "Mom, we need to finalize a transfer today. Please don't disappear on me." I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I turned it off completely. By the time the plane took off, I'd already stopped shaking. The sound of the engines was oddly comforting. Steady, mechanical, nothing like the chaos I'd left behind. I looked out the window as the city lights scattered below me, each one fading like a memory I was finally willing to lose. For years, I'd imagined escape, not running away exactly, just stepping outside the endless loop of being needed. But I never believed I'd have the courage. That night proved me wrong. I'd been planning quietly for months, though I hadn't realized it. Every time I felt cornered, I'd stash away a little more. Cash, copies of documents, a list of contacts who owe me small favors. I told myself it was for emergencies. I guess this was one. The flight attendant asked if I wanted tea or coffee. I said tea. Something simple, something warm. When she handed it to me, my hand stopped trembling for the first time since the night before. As I sipped, I thought of the letter I'd left on the kitchen counter. Not the one-line note on the dresser. That was for them. The real letter was sealed inside the box by the porch. I'd filled it with every truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. Every receipt, every loan record, every check cashed in the name of love. I wanted them to see that their comfort had always come from my sacrifices. By the time they'd find it, I'd be long gone. When the plane began its descent, dawn was breaking, a soft, peach-colored horizon stretching like a new beginning. I switched off airplane mode and watched the notifications flood in. 32 missed calls, a string of messages, all variations of disbelief. Where are you? Mom, this isn't funny. We can fix this if you just pick up. I didn't. Instead, I turned off my phone again and tucked it deep into my bag. There would be no fixing this. Not this time. By the second day, I was in a small coastal town I'd visited once, years ago. It was quiet, unpretentious. Fishermen at dawn, stray dogs napping in the shade, a market that smelled of salt and coriander. I rented a small flat with faded blue shutters overlooking the sea. The landlady didn't ask for ID beyond what I offered. Cash spoke clearly enough. Inside, it smelled of old wood and lemon soap. Perfect. Forgettable. Safe. I unpacked only what I needed. A change of clothes, my journal, a photograph of my daughter when she was 10, grinning with 2 missing teeth, holding a seashell to her ear. I placed that picture on the bedside table. She looked happy then, pure, before money twisted everything into obligation. The days blended softly at first. Mornings by the window, coffee and the sound of waves. Afternoons spent walking streets that didn't know my name. I felt invisible, and that was a kind of peace I hadn't known I craved. But at night, the quiet grew heavier. The mind doesn't stop just because you've escaped. Guilt has a way of sneaking through the cracks. I'd wake up sometimes, heart pounding, imagining her voice. Mom, how could you? And I'd answer her in my head, over and over, because I had to, because you left me no other way. Still, it hurt. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I walked down to the beach. The sand was cold beneath my feet, the waves licking the shore in rhythmic forgiveness. I bent down and picked up a small seashell, running my thumb along its spiral edge. I thought of her again, of that photo, that moment years ago when she believed the ocean could fit inside her tiny hands. I realized then that I hadn't left her out of hate. I'd left her because love had turned toxic, heavy, suffocating. The kind of love that drains instead of fills. And sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to stop saving them. I stood there until it was completely dark, the tide creeping closer with every breath. The wind carried a faint smell of salt and smoke, the world whispering that maybe, just maybe, I'd done the right thing. When I returned to my room, there were 64 missed calls, then 80, then 100. The messages had shifted tone, from anger to panic to something that almost sounded like fear. I placed the phone face down on the table. My thumb hovered over the power button, tempted for just a second to reply, to say I was safe, that I'd be back when things settled. But that would be a lie. So instead, I turned the phone off again, for good this time. The room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock above the window. That sound followed me to sleep, steady, certain, unbothered. Just before drifting off, I thought, for years that clock had counted the seconds of my servitude. Now it was counting something else entirely, my freedom. They must have arrived early that morning. My daughter and David, still half-dressed in last night's arguments. I imagine her hair pulled back hastily, his jaw clenched tight, both of them expecting breakfast and reassurance. Instead, they found silence. The house I'd lived in for 30 years stood open and hollow. The curtains still swayed from where I'd left the windows cracked, and sunlight pulled across the empty kitchen table where I used to lay out tea and toast. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and dust. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I could picture every detail. My daughter's voice breaking the quiet. "Mom!" Her footsteps echoed down the hall, into the bedrooms, the study, doors opening and slamming, drawers half-pulled, closets bare except for the ghosts of hangers. She must have seen the empty suitcase space first, then the stripped bed, then the letter on the nightstand. I had written only 4 words. "I'll take care of it." They weren't meant to comfort. They were meant to confuse. David was probably the first to realize something was wrong. He was practical that way, even in panic. I can almost hear him muttering, "She wouldn't just leave, not without saying something." But I did, because sometimes silence says everything words never can. On the porch, a single box waited for them, labeled in my handwriting. "For you both." Inside was no money, no checks, no miracle solution to their mess. Only the truth, written in ink and numbers. Receipts, bank slips, scanned copies of wire transfers. Proof of every time I'd come to their rescue. There were notes attached too. Small, neat post-its on each bundle of paper. Down payment, tuition, IVF, car loan, and at the very bottom, a letter. Every dollar has a story, it began, and I've told too many with my silence. I imagine my daughter sitting on the porch step, hands shaking as she read, the morning sun crawling up her knees, David pacing behind her, his voice rising and falling, trying to twist the truth into something he could still control. "She's lost her mind," he'd say. "This is dramatic. She'll be back when she cools off." But she wouldn't answer him. Not this time. She'd be too busy reading, line after line, realizing that every comfort she'd known had been borrowed from my exhaustion. I could almost see the moment it hit her, like a curtain pulling back to reveal the world without its filter, because somewhere in that pile of papers was a copy of the mortgage transfer, the one I'd never told her about, the proof that the house she lived in, the house she decorated and photographed and flaunted, had been in my name all along. And that morning, she'd find out it no longer was. I'd sold it, weeks ago, quietly, efficiently. The title transfer would have gone through 2 days before they came knocking. The new owners wouldn't move in for another month, but the house already wasn't theirs to enter. I can only imagine her face when she realized that. The disbelief, the betrayal, the dawning understanding that the woman she thought she could control had been 2 steps ahead the whole time. David, of course, would have exploded. "She can't do this. It's illegal. It's our home." But my daughter would have stayed silent, tracing the ink on my letter with trembling fingers. Because somewhere deep down, she'd know the truth. Everything I'd done had been both legal and earned. There's a special kind of silence that follows realization. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It presses down until the heart cracks open, and the mind starts to see clearly. I imagine her sitting there for hours, reading the same paragraph over and over. Love without respect becomes debt, and debt without gratitude becomes destruction. I wrote that line for her, not as punishment, as truth. As evening fell over their empty home, I picture her wandering the rooms again, her voice softer this time. "Mom, what did you do?" But I wasn't there to answer. I was on a balcony thousands of miles away, watching the ocean turn silver in the moonlight. I felt her words, though, like a ripple traveling across distance. And somewhere between guilt and peace, I whispered the wind, I finally did what I should have done years ago. That night, as I drifted off to sleep, I imagined her face not as it was, angry, frightened, lost, but as it had been when she was small, sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring the world she believed was kind and endless. Maybe one day she'd find that version of herself again. Maybe disappearing was the only way to let her. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand. I didn't look at it, but I saw the screen light up through the reflection in the window. One message previewed across the glass. How could you just leave me? The screen went dark again, swallowed by the night. I closed my eyes, whispering into the darkness, because it's the only way you'll ever learn to stand. And in the distance, a wave broke, a sound like finality, like something both ending and beginning at once. Morning light poured over the sea like honey, thick and golden, from a balcony of my small apartment. I could see fishermen pulling in their nets, their voices carried faintly by the wind. The world was moving on, unaware that somewhere far away, a reckoning had begun. I could almost feel it, the moment she opened that letter. Every word I had written pressed like a fingerprint against her conscience. For years, I kept everything, receipts, loan slips, signed notes of promise, hidden away in a metal file box. I used to tell myself it was for tax purposes, but truthfully, it was my quiet rebellion, my proof that I wasn't imagining the weight of what I carried. I'd written the letter over 3 nights, hands shaking, heart steady. It wasn't angry, it was precise. Each paragraph was a truth I'd swallowed for too long. You were a gift once, I wrote, before life taught you to take without asking. I told her how I'd drained my savings for her first house, how I'd canceled trips, sold jewelry, pretended I was fine when I wasn't. I confessed how her father's death had left me fragile, and she had filled that silence not with comfort, but with need. I told her about the days she called me selfish for not helping sooner, and how that word, selfish, had echoed for months until I stopped recognizing myself. Every word in that box was meant to hurt, but not to wound. Pain can purify, if it's the right kind. I imagined her reading it aloud, her voice trembling, eyes wet but wide open. Maybe David would hover nearby, trying to twist a meaning, muttering excuses like he always did. But she would know. Deep down, she would know. Because I'd written one line just for her, the line that had taken me the longest to write. Love isn't a transaction, but we made it one. That sentence was the heart of everything. I spent that afternoon by the window, watching the waves shift from blue to silver. I tried not to think of her, tried not to picture her sitting in that empty house, surrounded by evidence of everything she'd ignored. But memory is stubborn. I remembered her as a teenager, yelling at me for saying no to a school trip I couldn't afford. I remember her slamming the door, crying, saying, "You just don't want me to be happy." And I'd broken then, pulling money from a credit card I hadn't finished paying. I told myself I was helping. That's what mothers do, right? We mistake giving for love until it empties us. That night, I wrote in my journal, maybe she'll hate me for this. Maybe that's the point. Because hate, at least, would be honest. In my mind, I could see her as the day went on. Her anger turned confusion, then exhaustion. She'd probably started sorting the papers, looking for loopholes, trying to make sense of the logistics. But somewhere between the documents and the letters, she would have found the old photograph I left at the bottom of the box. It was of her 5th birthday. Chocolate smeared on her cheeks, candlelight reflecting in her eyes, her father's arm wrapped around us both. On the back, I'd written, "I would have given you the world if I thought it would teach you to build one yourself." That's where she would break. I know her. Tears first, then silence. Because truth always comes dressed as grief. I went down to the beach at dusk, my bare feet sinking into cool sand. The tide was pulling in stronger than usual, dragging little shells and pebbles into its mouth. I watched the water swallow them whole and thaw the box. How it too would consume the illusion she'd built her life on. I didn't want revenge. I wanted release. It's strange, the way freedom feels so close to loneliness. Some evenings I'd sit on the balcony, stare at my phone, my thumb hovering over her name. I'd think of sending one line, "I'm safe. Don't worry." But then I'd stop, because worrying was the first step to understanding. Sometimes silence teaches better than comfort ever could. I closed my eyes and listened to the sea. It sounded like breathing, slow, endless, forgiving. Somewhere, I imagined her doing the same thing, sitting alone, letters still open beside her. Maybe she'd whisper my name. Maybe she wouldn't. Either way, the tide had already turned. That night, as the waves crashed harder, a sudden gust of wind pushed open my balcony door. Papers fluttered across the floor, including one I didn't remember writing. A torn journal page from weeks ago. It said, "One day she'll understand that absence is just another kind of love." I stared at those words for a long time, the ink slightly blurred, the handwriting smaller than usual, and I hoped, wherever she was, she had finally started to read between the lines. I woke the next morning to a sound I hadn't heard in months. Thunder. The sky above the coast had turned dark and restless, like it was mirroring everything about to break open. The storm, I thought, had finally reached her world. My phone was buzzing nonstop. Unknown numbers, missed calls, messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Word travels fast when a life starts to fall apart. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the rain streak the glass in trembling lines, and imagined her house, the one she bought with the money I'd signed away, filling with silence, the kind that hums before collapse. 2 days later, I received an email from an old friend who still lived in our town. Her message was short. "You were right. Everything's come undone. She's lost a business. David's gone. Call me if you want details." I didn't call. I didn't need to know the details. I already knew how it would happen. David was a clever man, but cleverness without conscience is a time bomb. For years, he'd lived on credit and charisma, building a house of cards with charm as glue. He'd used her trust, her name, and my guarantees to keep his world afloat. Now the box I sent, those receipts of truth, had blown the first card away. Banks started calling. Lawyers reopened files. The whispers turned to headlines. And my daughter, the girl who once stood in my doorway accusing me of being selfish, was suddenly the woman standing in her own, surrounded by unpaid bills and empty promises. I shouldn't have felt satisfaction, but I did. It wasn't joy. It was something darker, quieter, a slow exhale after years of holding my breath. That night, I cooked a simple meal, rice, lentils, and the same mango pickles she used to steal spoonfuls as a child. The smell filled the apartment, warm and sharp. For a second, I could almost see her sitting at the table again, swinging her legs, talking about school. How strange that love and resentment could live in the same room. I whispered into the quiet, "You'll survive this, my girl. You always do." By the third week, another letter came. Not hers, never hers, but from her lawyer. A polite, distant note requesting clarification on certain financial documents I'd mentioned in my letter. I smiled as I folded it neatly and tucked it back into the drawer. Some lessons are meant to be learned the hard way. But still, I couldn't help it. Every night, I wondered if she was eating properly, if she was sleeping, if she had anyone to lean on. I pictured her lying awake, her mind racing between anger and regret, her hands trembling as she held the same receipts that had once seemed meaningless. Sometimes, I thought I could almost hear her crying through the rain. Then one morning, the call came. Her voice, after all these months, sounded like a memory. Low, tired, cracked to the edges. "Mama," she whispered. I froze. The word hit me harder than I expected. I'd rehearsed this moment, planned to be strong, calm, distant. But when I heard her say it, everything in me trembled. I don't know where to start, she said. Everything's falling apart. David's gone. The business, the accounts, even the house. He signed things I didn't understand. They're saying I might. Her breath hitched. I closed my eyes and let her speak. I didn't interrupt, not even once. I could hear her unraveling, and part of me wanted to rush in, gather her like when she was small. But another part, the part that walked away, knew that this was her storm to stand in. When she finally stopped, there was only silence. "Are you still there?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," I said softly. "I didn't know, Mama. I swear I didn't know what he was doing." I let the silence stretch. She needed to feel it. Then quietly, "You don't want to know." She didn't argue, just a long, shaking breath. "I need help," she said. The words cracked something inside me, not because they were desperate, but because they were honest. For the first time in years, she wasn't pretending. That night, after the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. The rain had stopped. The sea was calm again, the waves moving like slow breaths. I thought of how pain rearranges us, how it humbles, strips away illusions, and makes room for truth. Maybe she was finally ready to meet me there. But I also knew this. If I stepped in too soon, she would never stand on her own. So I wrote her a letter, not of comfort, but of guidance. When a house falls, don't waste time trying to rebuild it the same way. Let the dust settle, then decide what's worth saving. The rest, let it go. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I sealed it, placed it by the window, and watched the morning light spill across it like a benediction. In the distance, thunder rolled again, faint, tired, leaving the sky a little clearer than before. Somewhere I knew. She was standing in her empty house, holding the phone, reading my letter, her tears mixing with the first sunlight she'd seen in days. And though we were miles apart, I could feel it. Something had shifted, a fracture becoming a beginning. The facade had crumbled. Now, maybe something real could grow. Time changed shape after that call. Days became stretches of quiet that felt both heavy and kind. I'd wake to the hum of the fan, make tea, and sit by the window with the ocean before me, a silver line separating what I'd left behind from what still waited ahead. For the first time in years, no one needed me. And that silence, though strange, felt like oxygen. But silence is never empty. It echoes. It carries the sounds of everything we once tried to ignore. Every morning, as I stir my tea, I'd hear her voice again. "Mama, I need help." That tone, that tremor, it replayed like a ghost I couldn't shake. I'd tell myself, she has to walk through it, just as I did once. But Mother's heart never fully believes its own logic. The days stretched into weeks. My phone stayed quiet, though sometimes I'd scroll through old photos, smiling faces, beach vacations, the kind of filtered happiness that hides cracks underneath. Then, one morning, while shopping for vegetables at the local market, I saw her name flash across my screen. It was an email this time. Short, careful, like she was learning to speak to me all over again. I got a job. It's not much. Waitressing at a diner near the highway. I'm tired, but it feels honest. I think about you a lot. I hope you're okay. No apologies. No demands. Just truth, raw and plain. I read it twice before realizing my hands were trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing her in that diner. Apron tied too tight, hair pulled back, taking orders from strangers who'd never know who she once pretended to be. And for the first time in years, I didn't see my daughter the victim. I saw her, the woman. Weeks passed before I replied, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted to mean every word. I am proud of you. I always was, even when I couldn't show it. Keep working. Keep learning. The rest will come. Love, Mom. I didn't expect her to write back, but she did. Slowly, letters began to replace the silence. Little ones at first. Updates about her shifts, her tiny apartment, how she'd sold her jewelry to cover the last rent, how she found peace in things she never noticed before. One evening she wrote, "I cleaned tables for 3 hours straight today, but when the manager said I did a good job, I cried in the bathroom, not because I was sad, but because it felt like mine, my effort, my worth." That line, it stayed with me. My worth. For years, I tried to buy her safety, love, comfort. I thought worth could be inherited, gifted, transferred like property. But worth is something you bleed for. Months melted away. The monsoon returned. I'd grown used to the rhythm of waves, letters, and long walks along the beach. One morning, I opened my mailbox to find something that wasn't hers. It was from the bank, the one that had repossessed her house. Inside was a small slip. Outstanding personal loan, cleared in full. The name on it wasn't mine. It was hers. I held the paper in my hands and felt tears slip down my cheeks before I could stop them. She had done it, not by asking, not by depending, but by working, by standing, by choosing not to be saved. That night, I lit a candle and left it by the window. The wax dripped slowly, like years dissolving into forgiveness. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to call. I don't know if it was fear or humility, but I realized something that night. Love doesn't always return to what it was. Sometimes it becomes quieter, simpler, but deeper, like the ocean after a storm. I began writing again, journals, memories, recipes, fragments of old letters I never sent. I'd write about her laugh as a child, about her father's hands, about how grief had shaped us both. Maybe someday, I thought, she'd read them and see not the woman who left, but the one who finally let go. A month later, another letter arrived. This one was different. "Mama, I'm coming to see you. I found your address from an old envelope you sent. I don't want money or answers. I just want to sit with you if you'll let me." My hand shook. I could barely breathe. For years, I'd imagined this moment. I'd written it, rewound it, rewritten it again. And now, here it was, not a confrontation, not an apology, but an offering. The next morning, I cleaned the house, changed the sheets, made her favorite dal the way she liked. Extra garlic, a little too much salt. The smell filled the rooms, warm and forgiving. As I set the table, I caught my reflection in the window, older, softer, at peace. I whispered, "It's time." That afternoon, I saw her. She was thinner, paler, but there was something new in her eyes, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Neither of us spoke at first. She just stood there, clutching her small bag like a shield. Finally, she said, "You look well." I smiled. "You too." We both laughed a little, awkward, fragile. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't the kind of embrace that fixes years of distance. It was quieter, an acknowledgement that we'd both survived our own storms. When she whispered, "Thank you," into my shoulder, I realized she wasn't just thanking me for letting her in. She was thanking me for leaving when I did. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat by the window again. The candle had burned low, its flame small but steady. Outside, the sea shimmered under a thin moon. The storm had long passed, but its memory still lingered in the salt and air. And I understood something simple, something final. Sometimes love isn't about saving. It's about stepping away so the other can finally stand. The long silence had done its work. Now it was time to begin again. The morning she woke up in my home, the light was softer than usual, golden and hesitant, like it knew this was a day to tread gently. I found her sitting on the balcony, knees pulled close, watching the sea. She looked small again, but not fragile, more like someone piecing herself together with quiet patience. When she heard my footsteps, she turned slightly and smiled. "You still wake up early," she said. "I always did," I replied. "The ocean's too loud to sleep in." She chuckled faintly. "I think I forgot what silence sounds like. The city doesn't have any." I poured her tea, the same way I used to. Half milk, 1 spoon of sugar. She looked surprised when I remembered. Small gestures hold their own kind of forgiveness. We didn't talk much that morning. Instead, we let the moments fill themselves. The sound of waves, the clinking of cups, the soft rustle of wind through the curtains. It was awkward, tender, and real. Finally, she said, "I thought you'd hate me forever." I looked at her carefully. "No, but I needed to stop rescuing you." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I know that now. Back then, I just wanted everything to stay easy. When things got hard, I blamed you, because you were always the one who fixed it." I stayed quiet. She wasn't wrong. "David's gone," she continued softly. "He disappeared the night everything fell apart. I tried calling, messaging, nothing. For a while, I told myself he'd come back. But he didn't." She stared at the horizon. "I used to think I couldn't breathe without him. Turns out I was suffocating because of him." Her voice trembled at the edges. I wanted to reach for her hand, but didn't. She needed to finish saying what years of pride had buried. Later, as we walked along the beach, she told me about the diner, how she'd learned to take orders, handle rude customers, count change, clean tables until her back ached. "I hated it at first," she admitted. "But then one night, this old woman left me a note with her tip. It said, 'You remind me of my daughter.' She never gave up either." I cried the whole way home. Her laugh was wet with tears, but it was a laugh all the same. "You found yourself there," I said gently. "Maybe I did," she whispered. "Or maybe I just stopped running from who I really am." The tide rolled in, brushing our feet with cool foam. She looked at me then, truly looked, and said, "You were right to leave." Those words struck deeper than I expected. My throat tightened, not from pride, but from release. That evening, I cooked for us the old recipes I hadn't made in years. As I stirred the curry, she stood beside me, chopping onions clumsily. I could see her trying to hide the tears from the onions or the memories. I wasn't sure. We ate in near silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things we didn't need to say out loud. When the meal ended, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were rough now, her palms calloused. Honest hands. "I need to tell you something," she said. My heart stilled. "I sold the last piece of jewelry you gave me, the gold bangle Dad bought when I turned 18. I thought you'd be angry, but it felt like letting go of a life that wasn't real anymore." I smiled. Then it was the right thing to do. She blinked at me, confused. "Those things," I said, "were never meant to weigh you down. They were symbols of who we thought we needed to be. You don't owe me anything, not a bracelet, not a debt, not an apology." Her lips parted, trembling. "But I owe you everything." I shook my head slowly. "No, sweetheart, you finally earned it." After dinner, she asked if she could stay a few days. I said yes. The next mornings were quiet and simple. Long walks, shared meals, late-night talks about life and loss, and the strange grace of starting over. I began to see her not as the child I'd raised, but as a woman I'd always hoped she'd become, flawed, humble, but beautifully real. Still, beneath it all, a part of me was afraid this peace was temporary, that she'd leave again, and I'd be left holding memories that smelled of forgiveness but felt like endings. On her last evening, we sat watching the sunset bleed across the water. She said, "I'm going back tomorrow. The diner needs me, and I want to finish my courses. I've been saving up for a business diploma." Pride and sadness tangled inside me. "I'll come visit again," she said. "Not because I need to, but because I want to." I smiled faintly. "That's all I ever wanted." She hesitated, then took something from her bag, a small seashell, polished and pale. "I found this on the beach near my apartment," she said. "Kept it because it reminded me of you. I think it's time you had it." She placed it in my palm, small, delicate, strong enough to have survived the sea. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at the table holding the shell, feeling its ridges under my fingers. Outside, the tide whispered against the shore, soft and unhurried. I thought of all the years spent trying to fix, to protect, to hold on, and how sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is let go. In that moment, I realized the distance between us had vanished long before she arrived. It vanished the day she chose to live her own truth. The morning after she left, the house felt impossibly quiet. Not empty, just still, like everything inside was catching its breath after something sacred had passed through. Her cup was still on the table, half full of tea gone cold. Her pillow carried the faint scent of jasmine and salt. For a moment, I stood there, hand on the back of the chair she'd used, and smiled. It felt different this time, not the silence of absence, but of peace. She was gone, yes, but this time she had somewhere to go. I spent that day cleaning slowly, deliberately, folding the sheets she'd used, rinsing the dishes, opening every window to let the sea air in. While dusting the shelf, I found the seashell she'd given me the night before, small, imperfect, glinting faintly in the sunlight. I turned it over in my hand and realized how much it resembled her. Fragile at first glance, but strong enough to have survived every storm it faced. That shell became my quiet reminder that love, real love, doesn't break when you stop holding on. It learns to float. Weeks passed. Letters came less often now, but they carried a calm confidence in every line. She wrote about new routines, a small raise at work, how she'd begun helping other women at the diner apply for courses. "It feels strange, Mama," one letter said. "I used to think power came from control, from having everything in place. Now I see it comes from being honest about what's broken and try again anyway." I read those words over and over until they felt like scripture. Sometimes I catch myself talking to her out loud, while cooking, while walking along the beach, while locking the gate at night. It didn't feel like missing her. It felt like continuing a conversation that had just changed form. One evening, as the sky turned molten orange, I opened a box I'd left behind. The one I'd filled with receipts, papers, and fragments of truth. This time, I didn't feel anger when I looked at them, only gratitude. Every page, every mistake, every signed check and sleepless night, all of it had led us here. I decided then to burn them, not out of spite, but as an offering. The papers curled and blackened under flame. Edges turned to ash that rose into the wind. It felt like closing a book I'd been reading too long. That night, as I sat by the window, I thought of all the years I'd spent believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a mother meant bleeding quietly for others. But love isn't sacrifice. It's surrender, not to another person's needs, but to the truth of what they must become. For the first time, I felt the weight of motherhood not as burden, but as a kind of art, one that sometimes requires you to step out of frame, so the painting can finish itself. A few weeks later, a small parcel arrived. No note, no name. Inside was a photograph. My daughter standing outside a tiny cafe, apron on, smiling with a kind of warmth that doesn't need approval. Behind her, in simple chalk on a blackboard, the cafe's new name was written, Inheritance. Underneath, in smaller letters, owned and run by women who refuse to give up. My eyes blurred before I could even finish reading. I turned the photo over. There was only one line written on the back. "You gave me everything, Mama, not in money, but in courage." I held that photograph for a long time, letting the tears fall freely, not from grief, but from awe. This was her true inheritance. Not wealth, not property, not comfort, but the will to rebuild from nothing, the humility to begin again, and the strength to never let her worth be borrowed or bought. I placed the photo beside the seashell on my table. Two symbols side by side, one from the sea, one from the soil. Both survivors. As the evening faded, I stepped outside. The wind carried the scent of salt and hibiscus. The waves whispered against the shore like a lullaby. I whispered back, "You did it, my girl." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the ache of distance. Just pride, quiet, whole, and eternal. The horizon shimmered gold, the sky melting into the sea. That's when I finally understood the real inheritance we leave behind isn't money or property or names carved in stone. It's courage passed down through pain. It's freedom earned through letting go. It's love that learns to stand on its own feet, even when you're no longer there to catch it. And as the last light slipped below the water, I smiled, because she hadn't lost me when I vanished. She'd found me, finally, in herself,